Okay. Got it. I'm going to join and upload my presentation.
Okay, and I will go ahead and share our little intro here. So welcome everybody to the Vermont Ag Water Quality Partnerships Lunch and Learn Conservation Webinar Series. This is the third session that we've had so far in the fall 21 to spring 2022 series. We're really excited to welcome you here today, and we'll be joined by Juan Alvez of UVM Extension, who is doing part one of a two-part series with Cheryl Cesario about grazing management and soil health, which we're really looking forward to. In the spring last May, they joined us with Vermont Land Trust, and we really got the tip of the iceberg, and we heard from folks that they wanted to hear more. So this is a response to that. We're going to have 2 dedicated webinars, and thank you both so much for your willingness to come back and teach us. So just as a reminder about the Vermont Ag Water Quality Partnership, our mission is to, let me just minimize this here. Our purpose and mission is to improve ag water quality in Vermont by coordinating all of the partner efforts that are ongoing to provide education, technical, and financial assistance to the ag community. We have 3 overarching goals, which is to improve water quality and wildlife habitat on all engaged farmland for owners and operators participating in programs. Also to deliver technical and financial assistance in an efficient and effective way, and when providing that technical and financial assistance, to do so in a way that is the best service experience possible for the producer. So thank you all so much for joining us. I'm going to hand it over to Juan and you. Thank you.
Great. Share my screen. Screen 1. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we are.
Yes.
It
Okay.
looks like it's presenter view right now.
Presenter view. Okay. Let's swap. How about that?
That looks great.
Okay. Thank you for having me, Ali, and everybody. So I'm Juan Alvez. I work for UVM Extension at the Center for Sustainable Agriculture. I'm a research associate faculty here at UVM Extension, and grazing and soil health has been my passion forever since I did my agronomy. And today I'd like to share a few slides. This is not going to be exhaustive or anything, but I'm going to share a few slides about some of the projects I do, and some of the things I did, and some of the theory behind those projects. So basically my what guides me when I research grazing is I can't conceive studying grazing without also studying soils, the forages that are on top of those soils, and also the animals that interact, because they sort of co-evolved together throughout the ages, and they shaped each other. So there's a saying that you can build soils with grasses. You can build soil health with grazing. So I have, I have researched a few projects. So some of the projects you can see in what I call a grazing lab. A grazing lab does not exist physically. It exists in my program. And here are some of the research projects I've done, and some of the ones, some of them I'm still working on them. So fertility, compaction, greenhouse gases, management of pastures, and studies with beef, and later on with pigs and pigs on pasture, always on pasture farming. I also teach forage and pasture management at UVM. And next year, I will create the a course called Grazing, which will include not only large ruminants, but also sheep, goats, birds, and pigs. So polygastric and monogastric animals. For part of my life at Extension, I did research at Philo Ridge Farm for about 5 years. So I had several research projects that intended to enhance research and education in agricultural ecosystem functions for pasture-based farming. This is basically helping farmers work with nature rather than against nature, helping farmers to avoid adding too many inputs to their lands so that they can learn how to work with nature processes to enable nature's functions. And if you work like that, you can enable nature's services, ecosystem services in this case. So as I said, I've worked with 100% pasture-based beef, pasture hens, pasture sheep, broilers, pigs, and I love what I do. And it brings me to the topic of carbon farming, which I can define it as a variety of agricultural methods aimed at sequestering atmospheric carbon into the soils and in the roots, woods, and leaves of plants themselves. We know that regenerative agriculture can have the benefit of sequestering atmospheric carbon and put it in the soil via plants, via living plants. So we're going to visit some of the principles that guide my research as well. And this is important because several researchers and ourselves have measured that animals, grazing animals under regenerative agriculture or under management intensive grazing, holistic grazing, adaptive multi-paddocks can sequester more carbon than they emit per year. So a cow roughly emits about 100 kilos of carbon dioxide equivalents per year. But the action of that cow grazing on those pastures absorbs more carbon than that. And we will see some of the results of preliminary results of my experiments. So how do we do agriculture today? So it's basically a slash and burn agriculture. We've been through our forests, once or maybe twice in our generations, while doing agriculture. This doesn't happen only in Brazil or in Indonesia. When it happened here in the U.S., Vermont was deforested to graze merino sheep from Spain. So basically, we remove trees, do slash and burn, add animals to the land so that they can graze, and ultimately the land will be clear for the ultimate purpose, which is leaving the land prepared for agriculture, for row crop agriculture or cereal agriculture, right? So that causes a loss of ecosystem structure. When we remove ecosystem structure, we start to erode the processes that enable nature to work and function, basically. And that practice also requires a package of agrochemicals, irrigation, silos. It's aimed at providing food for our tables or food for our animals. Okay, the thing is, most of the agriculture produces very few commodities, very few grains, cereals, rice, corn, soybeans, wheat. So our diets have narrowed, and that narrows our ability to be healthy as well, because we need a variety of diets. So, and most of these commodities are used for energy purposes, alcohol for ethanol, okay, or biodiesel, soybeans for biodiesel, and also to feed animals. Most of these commodity crops are also exported to countries that don't have enough land to sustain their animals, such as China, Saudi Arabia, and other countries. And those animals are produced in confinement. So confinement is a very efficient way of producing animals. However, they also are in a regime that it restricts their movement and restricts their ability to be animals. So it's seen as a cruel practice today when you have animals caged like like birds and pigs, and in a less so with dairy cows, but public perception also cares about how animals are treated, and the public is the consumer that buys a farmer's product. So we should pay attention to that. All these model of agriculture is enabled or was enabled by cheap fossil fuels. When fossil fuels were abundant, the energy return on energy invested was low. So you invest 1 barrel of oil, you invest low energy to extract these barrels of oil from the ground. But it's a model that also leaves behind contaminated soils, contaminated water, problems with riparian areas, and problems with rural communities that start dissipating and disappearing. Rural schools that start closing, and the worst thing is that this is legal, and this is paid by us taxpayers through the Farm Bill to produce cheap and fast food. So this is how I like to round up this slide of how do we do agriculture today. We still do agriculture like this today. The picture in the background, it's a large field of I believe it's corn being harvested, and because Brazil has such benign climate, they are sowing for the next season. I mean, for the next, they can produce 2, sometimes it's more than 2 crops per year. So they're drilling corn or soy behind the harvesters. I counted 29 harvesters in that field, so it's and these fields were part of forests or mangroves or whatnot. So, anyways, and why is this important? Why do we care about this? It's because we're losing soil at an unprecedented rate. We are losing about 50,000 square kilometers of soil, which is about the size of Costa Rica every year. And everywhere you see more and more dust bowls dust bowls like the ones that happened in the US in the 50s, happening in other places. Because in theory, we are soil mining. We're mining soils, basically, by tilling and by unprotecting soils. And these soils become exposed without roots and without protection and without moisture. They crumble and they erode, and they may become a desert one day. So we have to have in mind that this soil mining is responsible for the loss of about 1% of minerals and vitamins in fruits, vegetables, and also meats after the Second World War. So we lose 1% per year of minerals and vitamins. And so with population growth, we are also reducing the amount of land per capita in the world. And that erosion that I was talking about was about 2,400 tons per second. Okay, so we're losing a lot of soil. And soil is what permits that we live as a civilization, we humans. So that's about a rate of 1,300 hectares per hour. And that amounts to 50,000 square kilometers, which is about the country of Costa Rica in size. So, and this data, it's is about 10 years old. So we know that, soil, there are 3 types of soil particles: sand, which is the larger ball here, silt, the one in the middle, and this speck here is a particle of clay. And every time we revolve the soil with a farm implement, every time we revolve the soil, we affect the structure of that soil. And when you have small particles, these small particles, they crumble down in between the spaces and they start clogging the pores of the soil. And why the pores of the soils are important is because the pores is where the microbial interactions happen with the root hairs and the fungi. Those microbial interactions need oxygen and water. And if you have a soil that is porous, that has pores, the soil is alive because it's breathing, is percolating water instead of water running off. And in this, as I said before, 1 teaspoon, I mean, probably most of you have heard of this, but 1 teaspoon of soil has trillions, quadrillions of different microorganisms that, if the soil is healthy, they are interacting, they are dying, they are providing their bodies and souls to the health of that soil. And this rhizosphere zone, which is comparable to our gut intestines, is where most of the interactions happen. And it's mostly amplified by the hyphae of the fungi. And those hyphae only happen when the soil is undisturbed, because every time you till the soil, you're disturbing the hyphae. When you disturb the hyphae, it takes 3 to 4 years for these root development to happen again. And so we consider the cow the perfect soil generator because it collects and shreds huge amounts of organic matter in the form of biomass. It inoculates it with beneficial bacteria in its rumen, and it generates antiseptic, seedless, single units of perfect soil. So I based my studies on some principles, the soil health principles, and also the management intensive grazing principles. The first soil health principle, which could be the second or the third, but I added as a first, is to manage more by disturbing less. And disturbance can happen by physical, mechanically, biologically, or chemically. So by reducing disturbance, we are allowing the soils to thrive and to produce more ecosystem processes, which will enable more ecosystem functions, which will increase the value of my soils and of what I farm, of what I produce, reducing the amount of inputs that I will add to this land and making farmers more independent. Another soil health principle is diversify with crop diversity. So the more crop diversity we have above ground means the more roots below ground we have, and that really complements well with the soil food web, which is the beneficial microorganisms that interact in the root zone, exchanging droplets of exudates, which are carbohydrates or sugars, energy, for minerals that these plants need, minerals or nitrogen, so on and so forth. So having a diversity of warm and cool season plants, in parallel with your perennial pastures, and I advise to have warm and cool season plants as a way to extend the grazing season and to work with a summer slump. But I advise to have those warm season plants in areas that have been disrupted, not in virgin soil, or in sacrifice areas, or in marginal areas. And those should be added as a cover crop with no-till practices. The third soil health principle is to grow living roots throughout the year to produce and promote all these really beneficial interactions that I mentioned before, to increase the amount of organic matter, to increase the amount of soil organic carbon. And we know that the carbon is sort of the glue, the battery that, promotes all these biogeochemical cycles. It promotes the water cycle, it promotes the nitrogen cycle, it promotes the sulfur cycle, it promotes the phosphorus absorption. If we can increase carbon in the soil, we are really increasing other co-benefits in the soil. The fourth principle of soil health is keeping soil covered as much as possible, because plants serve as the skin of the soil and is a self-defense armor that plants put together. When you have bare soil, soon you start seeing weeds, because in the seed bank of the soil there are multiple amounts of seeds of different species that are dormant, just waiting for the right time for them to germinate. And as a self-defense mechanism, these weeds, if they remain ungerminated for a long time, the soil will dry out and they will die. So they germinate and they start covering the soil again, and then we see weeds. When we see weeds, it's a self-protection. So weeds are basically protecting the soil to protect themselves. So it's an armor to the surface, and it protects from wind and rain erosion. It promotes moisture, because microbes and plants also like about 74 degrees of temperature, and it promotes a favorable habitat. The fifth soil health principle, okay, is to integrate ruminant animals in high stock density, just mimicking what nature does in the Great Plains of the world, in the Serengeti, in the Pampas in the South Americas, or in the United States Great Plains. So by having electric fencing, we can really mimic the action of these animals by staying together in high stock density for a short period of time, rotating to the next pasture or to the pasture that is ready when they are done with that parcel. And in that way, in nature, they learn to use the resource and move on fast to avoid predators. Okay, in this case, we control the predators, but some of them, but we are mimicking nature in managing the pastures. Okay, so basically, we should graze for anywhere from 1 to 3 days. More than 3 days starts declining the efficiency of grazing, right? We should consider that pastures need rest to recover, just like any living being. And we should place animals with the highest nutritional requirements to graze the best and the most pastures. So some of the grazing principles, cows move daily, pastures must fully recover before new grazing. I already repeated, but now we're gonna learn those principles, and those principles were laid out by André Voisin in the 50s. He wrote a book called Pasture Productivity. The book was reprinted and paid off by Alan Savory, because Alan Savory realized, how important contributions André Voisin has given, and André Voisin was forgotten completely. And then Alan Savory paid for the reprint of this book. So there are 4 principles that André Voisin called the universal laws of grazing. The first principle is a rest period, and it says, I'm going to read verbatim. Before a sward sheared with the animal's teeth can achieve its maximum productivity, sufficient interval must have elapsed between two successive shearings to allow the grass to accumulate in its roots the reserves necessary for a vigorous spurt of growth and to produce its blaze of growth or high daily yield per acre. Okay, so we must allow rest to for these pastures, for these plants to recover. The second law, the second principle of grazing is the occupation. The total occupation period of one paddock should be sufficiently short for grass shear on the first day or at the beginning of occupation, not to be cut again by the teeth of these animals before they leave the paddock. In other words, the time spent by a cow in one grazing paddock should be short so that the animals don't regraze the regrowth. Otherwise, we would call that overgrazing. Overgrazing is regrazing the regrowth. Okay, so short occupation periods, adequate rest periods. Third universal law of grazing is the maximum yields. So it says that animals with the greatest nutritional requirements must be helped to graze the greatest quantity of grass of the best possible quality. Almost perfect. I mean, you can frame these principles, because if you follow them, you can farm and graze in Vermont, in the Patagonia, in the Serengeti. You cannot graze in the poles, but or in the mountains, like where there's snow, but anywhere where plants grow, you can apply these principles. And the fourth principle is the regular yields. So it says that, and this complements these two last principles are sort of principles for that account for the cows. The first two account for the grass. So the fourth says, if a cow is to give regular milk yields, and this is because Andrea Vazan was a dairy farmer, she must not stay any longer than 3 days in the same pasture. Yields will be at maximum if the cow stayed on one paddock for 1 day or half a day, like in dairy. Okay, so I think these principles are the epitome of how we should face any grazing management. And of course, Andrea Vazan, worked on the grazing arithmetic, enabling these principles. So some of the nature secrets that they're not secret, but they're not taught at every school, and I learned because I went to school in other places, are biocenosis, which is the dynamic development of soil life only if the soil is undisturbed. The trophobiosis means that plants that grow in healthy soils are healthy plants, and thus they repel pests and pathogens. The ethylene oxygen cycle means that in undisturbed soils, there are pores, and in those pores, there are microorganisms respirating. Okay, and when they deplete the oxygen of that micropore, what they do is they go dormant, and when they go dormant, anaerobic microorganisms wake up and they release ethylene gas. When they release ethylene gas in that pore, it makes iron, which is highly electric, highly magnetic, so it binds to other metal and non-metal elements. It makes iron lose a charge, and then by losing a charge, it releases a droplet of phosphorus, a droplet of sulfur, and makes a flow of nutrients into the root hairs. Okay, but then when they suddenly, aerobic organisms, start respirating again because there's an influx of oxygen in that pore, and then a switch goes off, and then this happens, on and off all the time. So, and that's how we enable nature's processes to work only when soils are undisturbed. Okay. There are other grazing enabling ecosystem processes, like, the saliva effect, the cow pie integration, the root leaf interdependence. And, we want to promote more photosynthesis, more biological diversity to enable those higher macro and micronutrients availability for your soils, for your plants, less dependence on external inputs, slower soil respiration, less pathogens, and less agrochemicals to ever increasing soil fertility, to promote ever increasing soil fertility. So I'm going to skip this slide. I'm going to skip this slide because you've probably seen it, and it is explained the soil food web, right? And this is the picture of a healthy soil on the left here. It's full of organic matter. You can see the coloration of this soil. It's full of pores, so water and oxygen can penetrate these pores and feed these soil microorganisms. On the opposite end, on the left, on the right, I mean, it's a very poorly managed soil where the soil resembles a brick without any access to pores, because the soil has been either compacted or compacted by severe tilling. Okay, and this is what I explained about the ethylene oxygen cycle. The iron loses a charge and becomes and frees up, sulfur, phosphorus, and other micronutrients into the root hairs of the plant. It's fascinating. Okay, I already explained the trophobiosis. I'm not going to go to the other one because it's a little controversial, and I've got a little bit of pushback. So I wanna show what happened to this farm in southern Brazil. The farm was a very sandy soil, as you can tell. And after 5 years of grazing management, the farm was completely covered with forages and showing signals of ghost bumps, which are fertility patches, mostly developed because of the urine patches, because of the concentration of animals in this area. This was done without adding any fertilizer, any seeds to the soil, just animal management. Okay, so it started in 1959 with very little soil organic matter and very little phosphorus and potassium. And then a few years later, 1993, organic matter went up, about 8 times. Phosphorus went up, 16 times, and potassium went up 33 times. And farmer never added. This is a professor at the university, and he never added any inputs. He only grazed. So why using pastures? Because pastures are the least expensive, but they are superior or comparable in quality to hay and grains, depending on the stage where you harvest these pastures. Okay, I want to talk about one of the projects that I led at Philo Ridge Farm, which across the farm, which were 13 fields totaling 188 acres, we saw an increase in organic matter across time. In 2015 we had about 3.8% of organic matter. In 2017 about 5.7, and in 2019 6.5% of organic matter, and starting to level. This was done the same way. No seeds, no fertilizer, no organic amendments except for animals grazing in the fields. So we know, let's see what happens when we add 1% of organic matter. Okay, so this is the next slide is looking at differences between 2015 and 2017, and which tells us that we added about 1.7% of organic matter to the soils in 2 years. Okay, let's see what happens with water holding capacity. Well, it increased to about 6.9 million gallons. And when you translate these using different calculators, you can tell that this soil is able to absorb about 1.36 inches of rain in the first 6 inches of soil at once. So in a world where we are seeing more precipitation in Vermont because of climate change, you know, grazing management is a great tool to absorb water because it helps soils absorb more water. Okay, and we know that for every extra inch of rain, for every 1% of organic matter, it lowers nitrates and phosphorus runoff as well. 1.7% of organic matter also adds up to higher productivity. It adds about 56,000 pounds of extra forage, or 69 round bales, or you can add 28 additional animals. And it's a savings of $4,100 in hay bales. Because we know that for every inch of precipitation not infiltrated, you produce less 200 pounds less forage per acre. So, and in terms of soil, don't quote this slide because I'm still working on the math and on the conversions, but we added some organic soil carbon to the farm by grazing this way, high stock density moving throughout the different paddocks. Okay, don't quote 4.5 metric tons of soil because likely it will be less than that, but I have to redo all the math. So, but it's positive, it's not negative. Positive means that we capture more organic carbon. This is the product after 3 years of, this is the first harvest of beef. Exceptional meat, well marble, and it's a high. If it's not prime, it's high choice. And this obtained absolutely with is a pasture-based, grass-fed, grass-finished product. And it was finished with 26 months. Okay, and I'd like to end this presentation with a quote from Claude Bernard. I like his quotes. It's what we know already that often prevents us from learning. So let's open up our mind. Happy to entertain questions, and I have another presentation coming up, in 15 minutes. So I probably can entertain maybe 5 or so minutes of questions.
Thank you so much. That was excellent. Does anybody have any questions at this time? I would also offer up that if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I'm also going to ask folks to do a survey so we can get answers to those questions too. So no pressure, Juan. Whenever you need to leave, is fine.
And people can also reach me by email as well. I'm happy to. I think we have Peter. Yes, Peter.
Hi, Juan. How are you?
Hi, good.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
And it got me thinking, because the other day I was watching the news, and I know the agricultural landscape will, as we move forward in the future, and climate change, et cetera, it's going to change considerably. And one of the things that popped up was about livestock, and in the future, different ways of producing meat. And so if we go to a sort of a bioengineered type of meats, like from stem cells and stuff like that, where you take one cow and it can feed 1,000 people based upon that. I don't know if you're familiar with that research. You probably are.
Yes.
And so this is not really a question. It's more like, I'm just trying to put it out there as a comment to this grazing paradigm, like where it might head. And if we get to a situation where the demand isn't as high as it should be if you want a high population rotational grazing method, like just about the alternatives moving forward with soil health. It's a way out there question. I'm sorry, but I had to say it just because, as you said at the end, think outside the box a little bit. Where are we headed? I don't know if you have any comments about that or what you see. It's a big question. I'm sorry.
I have lots of comments about that and lots of yeah, there's a lot of controversy about the synthetic meats,
Yep.
either by plant-based meats and also lab-grown meats. I hear that they need to use for.
I think you blacked. I can't hear.
Yeah, Juan, we can't hear you, unfortunately.
Okay. So, and
Sorry, Juan, we can't hear you. That's a great question.
Yeah.
We're having technical difficulties.
The question probably created a crash.
Yeah, a cataclysm.
Cataclysm, yeah.
Yeah. So what I think, basically is that these companies, for one way they are using the time of climate change to put a new product, a new business model that people is investing in it. It still doesn't affect the amount of meat produced or consumed by consumers, but it's a business model, and every business model has like a rapid adoption. So people invest in those, and the curve of the diffusion of innovation of those products is really steep, and people invest in those when they are really growing like this, and they get great returns. I think it's a business. They are more interested in their business than in climate change. And what remains to be seen is what is going to happen with farmers that depend on their livestock when these companies are able to produce a protein, fermented proteins, at a rate that is 10 times less than animal-based protein. So we're going to have like a social problem, and we are obviating the fact that regenerative grazing can sequester more carbon than it emits, and that efficient grazing frees up less methane than inefficient grazing, like continuous grazing. So there are multiple things. I mean, this topic is not only controversial, but it's also full of rich topics to exploit and explore. But thank you for your question.
Yeah, it was more of a comment actually, but yes.
Any other burning questions before we let Juan get to his next presentation? All right. Well, thank you so much. It was wonderful to have you. I'll be sure to don't run away, people. I have to have you complete a survey. Thank you so much, Juan. This was excellent.
Thanks everyone. If you guys have any questions, send me an email or contact me by phone at my office, and I'm happy to entertain more questions later. But I had to go now.
Thank you.
All right.